Welcome to the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast, where we help businesses create killer messaging that unlocks their marketing potential. So we often talk about communicating externally to customers, but today we're excited to think about how we can take those same skills and apply them to how we communicate internally within a company, which is equally as important to growing a business. I'm Annie, your host, and I am joined by my Decoded co-founder, Kristin. We are so excited to have Ben Hanzo, founder at Setpiece, a product strategy consulting firm. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Annie.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks.
I am really excited about the conversation today for so many reasons. And where I kind of want to start is to hear if you both have any stories that you really love telling, or have people in your family that have a go-to story that you tell. You know, I think we're always in situations where having a fun or funny or compelling story is a good one to have in your back pocket. So I'm super curious to hear, do you guys have favorite stories that you always love to tell?
Well, here's a fun fact about me is I am a notoriously horrible storyteller. Really bad.
Wait.
No.
Hold on, Kristin.
Yeah.
We literally built our company around this. So maybe give a little bit of context.
No, I am. So I am not good at, hey, Kristin, tell this funny story that happened, because I backtrack and I confuse it. But I do know how to tell a good story for a company. But in the moment, I'm not great at it. But there are stories that I love hearing, and I have a lot of really great storytellers in my family. And so I have a story that my husband tells, which I don't even think I'm going to try to tell it today, but where he accidentally ended up at the Playboy Mansion one time because he volunteered to be in a Weezer music video, and they did not tell anybody what was going to happen. They just said, get on this bus. So he just shows up and gets on this shuttle. None of his friends wanted to come that day, didn't know where he was going. And all of a sudden the bus pulls up and it's the Playboy Mansion. And the whole principle was a bunch of kind of nerdy guys running towards the Playboy Mansion, and he got to be in it.
Oh my God.
Favorite. I love having him tell that story, and I'm horrible at telling it, but I love it so much.
Okay. Well, I hard disagree on you not being good at story. I know for a fact you are. And just for anyone who has no context of who Kristin's husband is, absolutely the last person who would ever find himself at the Playboy Mansion.
I see. That's where I should have set that up. Not the type of person that's a thing that he would seek out in life. So that makes it all the better.
Really good story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ben, how about you?
Actually, it's very similar for me in terms of my brain, and one of my superpowers is that my brain does not move linearly through the world. And so when trying to relay a story to friends and family about a thing that occurred, it's usually most helpful for that person to hear the beginning and the middle and the end in a linear order with an appropriate level of detail. And particularly in first time storytelling, I often struggle with that. And what this made me think of is that one of my best friends is an incredible storyteller, but also a really incredible story creator. So I've traveled with him, and he makes many of his life decisions based on how good of a story are we going to get from this experience.
Wow.
Which I didn't totally clock until we were halfway through a trip. And I was like, man, why is he he keeps making these fairly weird, and he was like, oh, I just thought it would be a great story. So I went with it. And so that was very great. It's great for me as a person who kind of thinks a little bit differently.
Wow. So it's becoming a pattern, I think, with our podcast that we need to tee up various after shows.
Yes.
And I feel like we need an after show, which is what are some of the craziest stories that have come from intentional experiences like that? That's very interesting, Ben. Okay, so let's get into conversation now. So I want to kind of lay the land here because we're talking about communications, we're talking about storytelling internally. So what we mean by this is obviously whenever you are working at a company, you're collaborating with people, whether your team, people in other teams, you might have partners, but there is this concept of the importance of communicating and storytelling internally. And what we don't mean, and what we're not going to really get into today, is the world of radical candor, how to manage, a team, how to kind of facilitate one-on-ones, how to give feedback. That is a very specific type of communicating that we are not going to cover today. But anytime you are working with other humans, you really have to be able to communicate with them. So we really wanted to take the principles that we think about communicating externally and apply those to how you can communicate within a team. So when we think about the importance of effectively communicating, being able to tell stories, to collaborate, Kristin, why is that so critical? Why is this such a critical topic?
Well, I think the only reason that we do anything effectively is if we understand why we're doing it, and then we can really dedicate ourselves to it. And so I see this happen a lot in companies where we totally skip the step of articulating, why are we doing this? Why is this valuable? What problem does it solve? And how do I expect us to execute on that? So it's the same principle of marketing, but it's internal. And so if people don't understand why they're doing something, what problem it's going to solve, we are missing out on a lot of momentum and opening the door for a lot of confusion, which is what holds our business back.
So one of the reasons I was so excited to have this particular topic is I do think that the three of us are uniquely skilled at communicating to a lot of different types of people. So understanding you might need to communicate with a lot of different types of people, or at a company, maybe different teams or people at different levels. And that's something that's really, really important. Ben, I think you are particularly skilled at this. And it's one of the things that I think as colleagues, we kind of bonded on because I saw and could really appreciate that. So I'm curious, Ben, like, where did that come from, that particular skill? Is it something that you intentionally have thought about and crafted? Is it something that's just like a part of your character skill set? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah. So when I talk about my origin story, I point to the fact that I spent 10 years as an artist. And I always say that after having tried to explain in writing or verbally art to other people that did not create that art, and to do that like succinctly in a way that felt authentic, explaining like how technical products fit together or why we're making certain business decisions, way easier. So to me, coming into product management, having spent 10 years, in different parts of the world, I was really grounded in how do we explain what it is that we're doing to other people so that they can sort of be on the journey with us.
Mm-hmm. And how have you seen, this is such a guiding question, so go off book if you want to, Ben, but how have you seen that be useful in running a product team, like very uniquely running product within a business? Yeah. Why is that useful?
Yeah, I would like broaden this to cover sort of product engineering design altogether. And what I would say is like, very often those teams experience the pain of not doing this well without necessarily understanding that that's what is happening. And what I mean is, if you are working in product engineering and you feel like the company doesn't understand why it takes a certain amount of time to do a thing, or they're not aligned with what you're working on, or they feel like what you're delivering doesn't matter, or they're just constantly asking you for more things, that is on you for not having, and likely on the CEO as well, if you're not the CEO, for not having clearly explained what your plan is, why you're pursuing that plan, what that plan does not include, and asking for help around the things that you need help with and explaining the constraints, right? And that just turns into a whack-a-mole of people coming at you out of all sorts of left fields with random stuff that's not aligned with your plan because you didn't explain it to them, listen to their feedback, and then move ahead.
Kristin, I know as we were kind of preparing this conversation, you really brought forward this idea of storytelling and communication has to be something that's really upheld at the top and like is such a critical component of leadership. And that connects, Ben, I think, to what you're saying around setting that context. So how can leaders adopt this really, really important principle of being good communicators and storytellers?
Well, I think the first thing is a leader understanding that it is their job to set the narrative. And we see this a lot of times where if the narrative is not set at the top, people make up their own narratives, and most leaders don't like the narratives that are made up. We have a lot of experience seeing that and then wondering, how did they get there? How on earth can they think that? It's like, well, because there was a vacuum in the story and they're going to create their own story. So I think step one is anytime that we are needing to get people on board with anything, which is pretty much everything that a leader does, what is the narrative? How are we inviting people into this story? And as always, we're going to go back to the same framework again and again, that if they need to get people on board with something, cast a vision for something, they need to clearly articulate the problem that this solves, what's in it for the people that they're inviting on the story, and what the expectations are. So I think actually taking the same systematic beats that we take in marketing, but doing that internally, anytime there's a big initiative, anytime, what is the narrative on this that we're inviting people into is critically important.
Yeah. And I think that it's funny, we said at the top, oh, we're not going to talk about radical candor, but I actually think there's a piece of this, particularly for coming from the top and for leaders, where there's a fear of vulnerability. There's a fear of acknowledging challenges. I think this often is, I think this is everywhere. I was going to say it's most prevalent in startups, but I think it's everywhere, where we want to create momentum and energy and positivity. And so what we end up doing is like erasing the experience that a lot of our frontline folks are having, and not acknowledging that, like, you know, we're laying out a big vision, but, you know, we're experiencing these challenges today as a company, and like, here's how we're going to overcome it, which is like literally the storytelling framework. And we're missing a huge opportunity to get everyone on board by including them in the story, rather than just trying to say like, oh, like, we have to move forward. We have to be positive. We can't, like, and there's, you know, there's a balance, right? It's not great if you're a startup that's going to run out of money in 12 months to be talking about that all the time. I think folks have trouble holding that. But there's a way to do this that I've seen done very elegantly, that acknowledges what folks are going through on a day-to-day basis and the challenges and barriers to success inside of the container of like the vision we're working towards and how we think we're going to be successful.
You know what? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Annie.
go for
you know
it.
what that unlocks for me?
Yeah.
That's one thing that we're always working with our clients on, is really positioning the customer as the hero of the story, not the brand. And I think a lot of leaders in their narrative storytelling stay in that hero role, and they're like, everyone here is to support this vision, instead of positioning the people that we're communicating with as the hero of the story. So if you're talking to frontline, we need to not only say you're a part of this story, but here's how we're going to work together to support this story. So making sure that you're clear who's the hero of the story, and does need to be the people that you're engaging with here.
Well, it brings up how important the idea of messaging and positioning is, even about how you communicate success or lack of success as a business. And I feel like sometimes the idea of positioning could almost feel a little manipulative. Like, what's the spin? Like, what's the spin? And that's not what it is. Truly, it's how are you communicating in a way that brings everybody in. To your point, Kristin, it's not positioning the CEO as the hero, because let's be honest, it's completely dependent on what's happening across the board. And so kind of communicating it in that way. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about what happens when communication breaks down and when we're not telling the right stories. And it strikes me that we have some different representation in this group from functions that often have some conflict internally. So, I mean, lots of different stereotypes here, but kind of a frontline support team and a product team. There can often be conflict that happens there. A marketing and a sales team, there can often be conflict that happens there. So I'm curious from both of you, like, where have you seen things break down when communication isn't clear? And how might you coach someone on a team to start to do better in communicating and breaking down some of those silos and conflict?
I mean, I believe that everything is made or broken on expectations. Always. I could talk about that all day long. And I see that a lot of times when expectations are uncommunicated and just left up for grabs, that is a recipe for disaster. So I see that breaking down between marketing and sales a lot, of like, oh, I gave you the lead. You didn't do anything with that lead, or you didn't nurture it the right way. It's because there was no bridge, no communication bridge for here's how we're going to do this together. So I think that is a big place where communication breaks down, where it's like, you didn't meet these expectations. We didn't say these expectations clearly. That's basically saying jump across this chasm, and good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think on the support and product is a really good example, particularly like in companies that have been around for a minute. And it's very tricky because there are often moments when support is being asked to sort of like put the fingers in the proverbial dike to like kind of hold back the tide because we need to, make deeper investments or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that is both a narrative problem to solve in terms of like, what is the frequency and quality of updates we're giving those folks on how things are going so that they feel like they understand what is happening and that they're part of it. But it is also practically a thing where like, you can only ask people to do so much. And you do have to find ways to bring gifts or, do whatever it is you need to do as the product and engineering team to understand that like, these people are getting yelled at or they're having really tough conversations with customers all day long. And it may be pragmatically the case that it's going to take us 3 months to deliver the thing, but is there anything we can do between now and then that's going to like at least acknowledge that this is what's happening?
So Ben, we've actually been in a situation working together and collaborating, kind of running support and running product. And I think that when we were considering this particular topic, the idea of storytelling, and Kristin, the concept of like, here's a problem that I'm facing as a team, here's the impact that it has on the business. Here's why these things are so important to me. I think that type of conflict that can happen can be so powerfully limited or kind of soothed by, look, this is what I'm facing on a regular basis. These are the problems that exist. And having everybody just get a little bit more context and understanding and have a shared set of expectations for what's going on. And I think what I've seen as an attempt in the past that was like a valiant attempt but didn't quite cut it was trying to create that connective tissue from a personal perspective and a personality perspective and let's drive empathy for what everyone is going through, which is cool. But I think it was missing some of the practical business related storytelling of, but as a support person, this is my mandate and this is why I'm having struggles with it. And this is why I need some support. I need some help. Product being able to do the same, listen to that, but then also say, well, here's my mandate. Here's a problem I'm trying to solve as a business. Here's what I'm doing about it. So I just think that particular piece of tension is like, that is why we need the ability to tell stories so that we can cut past conflict, which slows things down.
I mean, the kernel that was in that for me is actually the listening piece. So if you're going to have a company in which teams work effectively together, they need to be able to clearly articulate their story and what's going on for them and what is standing in the way of their success. And that needs to be heard, right? Like it's very tiring to continually tell everyone why it is that you're not succeeding and for that to be acknowledged, but then for nothing to be done about it. And so then you just stop because you're like, meh, that's not getting anywhere. And then, then we're kind of done. But the like listening piece is critical.
Yeah.
And the kernel that I took away is listening is critical and listening alone is not enough. Yeah. And empathy, and this is like the only time you're ever going to hear me say this, but like empathy is not enough. And I think in the context that we've seen, it's like, oh, we can sit with each other's struggles only so far. And then at some point there needs to be not just decisions about what are we doing about it, but communicating what we're doing about it and communicating that team-wide, organization-wide. So it's listen and pair that with action and then communicate about that action.
Yeah. I mean, very important to note that like just being an active listener in this situation, like making nice noises and like making somebody
so smart, Ben.
Completely meaningless. If nothing changes.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
If we're just having that once a quarter or once a month, we're having that conversation where people are sharing really difficult things, and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds really hard, and then nothing happens. What is the point?
Well, this is like so actually deep and meta because one of the things that we talk a lot about storytelling from a marketing perspective is you're not just telling a story to elicit an emotional reaction, right? Storytelling in marketing is not just to create a commercial that makes people cry. It's not about making a funny Super Bowl ad that makes people laugh. Like that's not the point. It is actually about driving action. And so this is a perfect way of thinking about it internally. If we just reflectively listen to each other and then nothing changes, that is not effective storytelling. We tell stories to set common expectations, to effectively communicate, to give context about what things are a part of this reality, and then to move the needle and actually to make something happen. Mm-hmm. It's not just about telling a good story.
Yeah, and it has to be connected to the business, right?
Yeah.
For better or for worse, you having a bad time as a person is meaningful and impactful to me as a person, but to the business, we need to connect that to why this matters to the business.
Yeah.
Like what impact is this having on our business and our ability to succeed? And it could be like, well, my whole team is burnt out and so they're being very short with customers and so our CSAT is going down. Like that is totally a thing or is going to go down, right? But it is most effective to communicate this in terms of what is this going to mean for the business? Because that's the language we all speak
Yeah.
inside of this organization.
Totally. So as we wrap up, I want to hear from both of you. If you are coaching someone on your team to become a really good internal communicator and storyteller, what is one thing that you really want to impart to them? What's a skill, a tactic, one little kernel of knowledge that you'd want to impart to somebody to help imbue them with these great communication and storytelling skills? And Kristin, we'll start with you.
Well, I would say the first skill is being clear in how you communicate and not trying to play the hype game and not trying to muddle it. And so first of all, it's like, let's commit to clarity and then really clearly articulating. If I'm asking you to do something, let's name the problem that we're aligning around together, and then we'll build the plan to get there, but not skipping this step or assuming that we all are on the same page with this problem that we solve. So clarity and orienting around solving a problem.
Amazing.
Get reps. Just get reps. Like
Practice.
It's if you're not doing it today, start doing it, and don't get caught. Like, we've said a lot of things in the last bit about like how to do this well or poorly, and it can feel overwhelming, particularly if you're not a person who like speaks publicly a lot or is comfortable with that. So get reps doesn't mean like stand up in front of the company tomorrow and talk about your product roadmap. It probably means like find a friendly, give them the present, like work up to it, but you have to build the muscle and you have to start today. And it has to be a habit. Like, you have to hold yourself accountable to doing, particularly as a product leader, to a cadence that you don't move off of. Like, there is no excuse for missing your update to the company, because that's like literally one of your number one jobs is that the company understands what we're doing on the product side and they feel aligned with it.
Yeah. So anchor your communications in the problem that you are out there to solve. Make sure that you're communicating clearly and just get those reps, get practice, build that muscle. You're not perfect out of the gate, but it is absolutely something that we can all learn. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining the Decoding Story-Based Marketing Podcast. If this was helpful, please subscribe, leave us a rating. And for more information on Decoded Strategies, visit decodedstrategies.com, or you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We'll talk to you soon.